Smart Resizer 2.0 is officially released today. And just a quick disclaimer, Smart Resizer used to be called Smart Sizer. And the reason why I changed the name, because we do have a tool that's called Smart Size. So Smart Size, Smart Sizer, too similar as far as that goes, and a lot of people would confuse it. But actually, I got an email from somebody, and they were asking me a question about Smart Sizer, but indirectly, they kept calling it Smart Resizer. And I remember thinking, I actually like that name, Smart Resizer. That's exactly what it does, and this way it would stand out. It wouldn't be similar to Smart Size. So I thought it'd be a good idea to change it to Smart Resizer. So that's how we arrived here. So Smart Resizer is Smart Sizer, which means that if you have purchased Smart Sizer from us in the past, or if you purchased our tool bundle, then you definitely get the upgrade for free. You can just go to ukramedia.com, re-log in, re-download, reinstall, and you'll have this today. So in this video, it's probably going to be a long video because I'm just going to talk about all the features, everything it does, all these things, and we'll do some practical projects. I'll do some practical real-world examples. So it might be a minute. I'm just going to warn you. But let's talk about Smart Sizer or Smart Resizer. There you go. And I'm going to use some basic layers here. We have some text layers. We have a shape. And let's start with Smart Resizer. So before, if you remember Smart Sizer, it looked totally different. So I'm trying to change all my tools to look similar. So if you look at something like Smart Animator, you'll notice we have like a top shelf, and then we have like a tab system that you can quickly change. You go to stroke and you can see options for that in here. We have like reset options. So I wanted to copy similar concept, similar like layout, and apply it to Smart Resizer. And so that's the whole point. So again, we have a top shelf, we have a run button, just like that one does. It has a run button. So I'm changing most of my tools to make sure they look the same. So we have a top shelf, we have a run button, we have these two buttons, which means the first one right here, it's code mode off, meaning like it's going to change the size of your layers, but it will not apply any code. But then this one is a code mode. If you click on that, it will disable the other. Basically, it will change the size, but then it also applies a code to the scale property, which comes in very handy for template creation, mogurts, things of that nature. And then obviously delete question mark, which is all about the tool. And then we have the tabs, and here we can go to fit to options. We have all these options in here. We have scale options, we have margin options, and we have size based on options that we'll talk about all of these. And we also have reset. We have global reset, local, and it's very similar to what we have here as well, global, local. So the whole idea here, if you know how to use one tool, you can kind of figure out how to use the other as far as layout goes. Obviously, they do different things. So that's like the general layout of the tool, very basic as far as like, tab system. I do like the tab system because you can introduce more features down the road and you don't have to lose a lot of space on the Y. So that system is definitely good. Okay, so let's talk about this tool for a second. So we're gonna start with the code off, or basically not apply any expression just yet. And it's a good tool for that, just to resize layers. So for example, in the past, here's how you would do things. So you would select maybe you want take these two layers and you want to size them to the size of this layer. And so the way it worked in the past, and it still works like that, you would just select layer 1, select layer 2, and the last layer you select is the layer that it's going to grab the width or the height from. So the last layer you select is the layer it gets the size from, and then it applies it to all the other. So this is the last layer I selected. Then I can go to right here. The first one is fit to options. Basically, it allows me to choose what I want to do. So I can fit to width, basically fit them all to width, but then notice it will just stretch them all on the X, but it will not maintain the aspect ratio. The same thing on the height, it will grab the height of the last selected layer and it will adjust all of them. And then the same thing here, it will fit to width, but notice this one will actually adjust, it will fit it, but it also adjusts the aspect ratio. It will scale it proportionally. So that's good. And then the same thing for the height. And then the last one, it will just stretch it on, basically copy it to a T, exactly what you selected last. So I'm gonna let's do stretch it, basically stretch it in to the width and not maintain any aspect ratio. So if you run this, boom, just like that, the last selected layer. So let me undo this. Again, the last selected layer you select. So if I select this last, if I stretch this, boom, it's gonna stretch it to that. If I select, stretch and maintain the aspect ratio and do the same thing, it will size it, but notice it actually doesn't stretch the text. It looks nice. And again, just one more time, we can select all of this, select this layer, and then stretch it. Let's do stretch, boom, just like that. That's how it works. Now, we also have this option in here, margin, or size, I guess. Let's talk about size for a second. So size here, the way it works, if you set it to 0 on both X and Y, it will basically go with the last selected layer. And I mean, that comes in very handy, but if you type any number, then at that point it takes over. So if I selected all of these and I said, hey, I want you all to be stretched to, on the width, exactly 500 pixels, and I'm gonna do stretch, and just like that, boom, it's gonna be exactly 500 pixels. So that comes in handy for some things, but then you can go over here again to size, and you have more options. If you click on this button, you'll have all of these options in here. So for example, based on my selection, I can say, hey, based on my selection, get the size from the first selected layer, and it will get it from the first selected. You can say last selected layer, or comp width. You know, if I click on comp, it's going to type comp. And so now when I run this, it will stretch it to the comp width. That makes sense. Then at any point you can type it, but if you click here, it will kind of give you a cheat sheet here so you can kind of see exactly what you want. So maybe you can say, do it based on the smallest selected. So I'm going to click minimum, as you can see, types it in here. And out of all these, this is the small one. So it's going to resize all of them to the smallest one. So if I run this, just like that, it works like a charm. That makes sense. Then again, you can do the same thing for the largest right here when you click on it. And when you run this, this is the largest. So boom. So that's what we had before. And again, at any point, you can reset this to 0. That's good. So now I've added another feature. It's this pull feature. So at any point, you can select any layer and you can pull either the width or the height of that selected layer. So I can say, hey, give me the width of this layer. Boom, just like that. It's 1500. That's perfect. Then I can say, give me the height of that. So boom, just like that, it's 200. And so now I can say, hey, stretch this layer to the exactly whatever I typed in here, but I want you to do it on both, like stretch it, make it exact same shape, basically. So when I select this and when I run this, boom, you can see it's exactly same. So if I put it in here, it matches it perfect. So I guess the idea of it is pretty basic, but then you can build up on that. So for example, here's another example. So what if I wanted to do the same thing, stretch this exactly to this layer, right? But then I wanted to add some margin to the top. So I wanted to basically add some margin there, right? So subtract some values from it. So the third tab here is margin. So I can say, hey, get the size of this and then also add maybe like a 50, let's do 100 pixel margin on the X, and then maybe 50 on the Y right here. So now if I run this, we get the same size, but keep in mind, it's also taking this into consideration. So if I run this real quick, and now if I put this in here, you can see we have 50 pixels and then 100 on each side. So that's what margins are for. So that's what it is in a nutshell. Now we'll talk about time because that's very important. As you grab size from things, where it is in a timeline is very important because in some areas the size is different because it's keyframes. So we'll talk about that. We'll touch on that later down the road. So that's basically it as far as basic goes. I think you get the idea here, but we also have the same thing, but it's a code mode. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that it will size it, but it will also maintain that size. So what if I wanted to do this? I'm gonna copy all this text and I can say, this time we're gonna run a code, right? I'm gonna say, hey, I'm gonna reset this. Let's reset that, the margin as well, reset it. And I'm going to basically fit it to the width, but maintain the aspect ratio. But I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna say, hey, do it to 500 pixels, right? Basically size them all to 500 pixels on the width and maintain the aspect ratio. And when you do that with the code, watch this, it will do it, but not the way you think with text, because it basically grabbed the last, so if I start typing it, watch this, it's gonna go to 500 and then it's gonna start sizing it. So that's basically like it restricts you, it basically limits it. And not only that, it creates the width here, you can adjust things on the fly. You have all these controls. And all of these will make sense as we keep going forward. So I just want to quickly show you what they are. The code mode, again, it's primarily for like template creation. I use these tools all the time as I create templates. And that's one of the reasons why I create them, because I find that very useful. So let's go to the next composition here. I'm going to do all of this. All right, so let's go to the next one here. It's more of a practical. Now we're going to stay in the the code off or code mode off mode. Okay, so we're gonna just resize these things real quick. So it's something practical. Maybe you're working on a still that's like an ad, and this is just a made up ad. It doesn't exist. So let me kind of quickly show you through, like walk you through this stuff. I'm just gonna do it quickly without explaining. So I'm gonna size both of these to the width of this shape. So I'm gonna select this shape. I'm gonna go to the size, pull this size over here so it looks like it's 1000 pixels. I'm also gonna size both of these to 1000, but I'm gonna add some margin, maybe like 100 on the X. So let's do this. We're gonna select this text, that one. Let's maintain the aspect ratio. So boom, just like that. So we have this selected. I'm gonna select this text, maybe push this up something like this, that's good. Then I'm gonna select this one. Let's go to margin. I'm gonna reset this margin and size. I'm gonna select the size, pull this in, looks like it's 800. So again, we're gonna subtract or do a margin on the width. So basically size it down, and just like that, we can put this up above here. Maybe this text or this shape right here, I wanna stretch it to the size of this text. So we're gonna reset margin. We don't want any margin. Let's grab the size of that text and let's stretch it this time. So we're gonna stretch it, not maintain any aspect ratio. And then boom, just like that. We have something interesting. So instantly we created something very simple, but it's precise. You can see all of that stuff is like perfect. You didn't have to like eyeball things. And I mean, it can take some time just doing that. And I can quickly select them, you know, do all kinds of stuff, position them in the center. And in no time, I made this look perfect. As you can see, everything's working fine. And you can turn this into template by using the code mode. Anyway, so that's like a quick and simple example of how you can use this just for like sizing stuff, not even like template creation, just to size things and make things look perfect. So let's go to the next example here. So next one is a lower third. It's just a static lower third, but let me show you how I use it to create as a template. Now it doesn't have any animation, so we're not to the animation part yet. So let's do this. I'm just gonna kind of do it, and you can watch me do this, how I would approach something like this. I'm gonna reset everything. So it's gonna reset all of these tabs. Okay, so next I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna use actually Smart Anchor because I wanna make sure this anchor is locked in. It's not going anywhere. So I'm gonna use a code for that. And I'm just gonna tell it to be at the bottom. So it's gonna be locked in there, and it's not going. If I type things, it doesn't matter where I type, it's gonna be locked into that. And for this one, I'm gonna lock this in the center. So when it grows out of the center, and it's gonna be locked into that as well. So that's why I use Smart Anchor. For that, it's perfect. As you can see, it applies an effect, it's good. So then I would say, hey, I wanna limit this. We're gonna go to Smart Resizer, and we're gonna limit this to maybe like 700 pixels. What's the size of it? Let me make sure. Yeah, let's do 700. And let's see, we're gonna maintain the aspect ratio. So we're gonna stretch it to the width, maintain the aspect ratio. I'm gonna hit it, boom, just like that. But make sure, hold on. Let me do this. Let me undo this real quick. So make sure, yeah, I'm gonna reset just to be sure everything is reset. Let's do width, and we're gonna do 700. And we do want to do code. So make sure you throw in, yeah, the code is important because we want to apply a code. And just like that, okay, there you go, now it works fine. So now when I type, as you can see, it'll be fine. And then it's going to start stretching to that. So it is already a template if you think that way. So now we're going to keep building. We're going to keep building on this. We're going to select this and we're going to stretch it. So we're going to say, let's go to Smart Resizer. We're going to say, do the same thing. And this time we're going to stretch it. So we want to stretch it to that. And boom, apply the code. So it's working well. Now for this subtitle, we're going to tell it to maintain the aspect ratio. And we're also going to do 700 for right now, but we're going to add a margin. So we're going to say maybe like 25 margin on the width. So we only want to go to a certain size, and after that, start resizing. So that's good. We're going to apply this. And really, that's it as far as like, setting up. Now, obviously we have to use some code to make things happen. Now, the first thing I want to do, I want to grab the size of this text. And for that, I like to use Smart Size. I can basically apply it, and it's just a reference tool. It tells me the width and the height of that text, regardless if I move the scale or, it gives me correct size. So now what I can do, I can select the both of these, press E to reveal the effects. So we're going to go to Smart Sizer or Resizer, and I'm going to pull this up some so we can have more space here. And we're going to select both of these and both of those hit S twice to solo those. And in here, here's what I'm going to do. Where we have the size of the text, I'm going to say the width. Hey, we're basically going to link it to the width of the text. And the same for the shape as well. So make sure I pull this up and we're going to link it to the width. And so now you can see that everything is going to follow the width. So if I type things, you can see it's staying with the width of the text, the shape does. And so now I can quickly just type something like, let's do this. I'm going to type Sergey Prokhnevsky. Okay, and as you can see, it automatically resizes it. And it doesn't matter where I type in here as well. So let's type something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now you can see it starts resizing. I can't talk and type at the same time. So as you can see, it starts resizing it. So I mean, essentially it's a template. It doesn't take very long to set up. Now, if you didn't have these tools, you'd be doing some major coding and stuff like that. And you can also adjust these things on the fly. If at any point you want to adjust like the size of the text, you can just say the width of that, you can extend it and everything will adjust. Maybe you want to adjust the margin of this subtitle text. So you can say add on to that margin, it will maintain, and maybe want to go back. So you get the idea. So it's definitely, I mean, you have all these controls that you can adjust. You can move them into mogurts. People can have more control. And yeah, I definitely keep that in mind. I've had years of creating templates for Fox Sports and you name it. And it's just, there's always things that you think of and you write them down and eventually you put them into tools. So I try to overthink stuff like crazy, things that I would find useful. So you would have just about everything you need. So let's go to the next example. So something like this. I'm going to take this graphic. It can be anything. It can be image. It can be video. And I basically want to convert it from the scale value to pixel value. And to do that, I would just use Smart Resizer because I can say, hey, apply code. Let me reset everything. So apply code, no margin, nothing, basically nothing, everything to 0. And if you set it to 0, it's going to grab the size of the last selected layer. So if you select one layer, it's going to grab the size of that selected layer. So it's the last selected layer. And so we're going to grab or select this fit to width and height. So when I run this, nothing happens. But as you can see, if I go to scale here, it took over with the code. So now the scale is controlled by this right here, this pseudo effect. So we have width and height, but both of these values are now in pixel, which is super helpful because we can do something with it. So now I can select this text and I can go to Smart Size and I can grab the size of it, basically give me a reference of the width and the height. So I can lock this in and I can go to here and let's go to width here and I can say, hey, we're going to grab the width of the shape to be the width of the text. And so when you do that, I mean, it's perfect. As you can see, it's correct. But because we have graphic stuff, we need to adjust some margin. So we're going to go to this text and Smart Size has some offset value. So again, I built that in because years of experience, I realized this feature comes in very handy. So then you just offset this maybe like by 300, maybe even 400. Let's do 400. So maybe you want to have some wiggle room here. So now what that does, when I type things in here, I can say something like 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And notice it goes with that shape. It comes in very handy. I recently used something like this for the NASCAR on Fox Sports, and they had like a brush strokes like that, and I was able to use my tools to rig it up, and that's how I use it. So yeah, stuff like that comes in very handy. I definitely find it useful. So yeah, Smart Resizer has different uses, and one of them is definitely the ability to turn something into from like the scale property to pixel property. So you can adjust pixels, which if you do any kind of coding, that comes in very handy. And that's honestly, that's the reason why I created in the first place. I called it, the first name was Pixel Sizer because it converted your layer from scale to pixel value. And that was the whole point. But then I kind of built on that and made it bigger than what it used to be. So that's what that one is. Now let's do something else. So let's say we have something like this. We have an example, just a simple animation. And what if I wanted to bring in a logo to be inside of it here that will change and adjust in After Effects. So for example, maybe it can be this like the Dropbox logo. I'm going to put it in here, put it underneath here. Let's call it logo, and I'm going to parent it to this controls because that's what's animated. And maybe I wanted to adjust it to fit this. Okay, something like this, right? So now if I preview this, you can see it works well. But the problem is now when I bring in other logos that are different sizes, like maybe this Twitter one, you can see it doesn't stay in the same area. It messes things up, and that can be a problem unless you set it up using Smart Resizer. And here's how that works. So for example, I'm going to apply the code. Let me reset everything. I'm going to apply the code, and I'm going to fit it to width first, and then I'm going to go and grab the size of this this shape right here, and we're going to pull in both width and height. Okay, and then margin. Let's do like 60 for right now, just to see. Make sure we go to the next one. There you go. I thought I was hitting tab. Okay, and 60. And then, so we got the margin, we got the size figured out. We're gonna do the fit to width first. And then if I select this logo, and if I run it with the code mode on, as you can see, we'll resize it to 60. Maybe 60 is a little too much. Let's do like maybe 40. There you go, 40 and 40. All right, something like this is good. So now, I mean, it still does the same thing. It animates, it does everything it needs to do. But now I can select this, and I can go to my, by the way, let me do this. Let me uncheck this, delete this. Okay, so now I can drag in any of them. If I hold Alt and click and drag and replace, notice all those awkward logos, especially this Facebook logo, you can see it will stay within the area that I define it to be. So now it doesn't matter what I drag into, it's gonna work flawlessly. It will always be in that. And I've used it multiple times for, like, I remember NASCAR logos or like player images, because they're all different sizes. You can maintain it a certain way, and it comes in very handy. So Smart Resizer has different uses. It comes in very handy when you create templates. All right, so what else? Now we talked about this, we talked about that, we talked about this one. Let's talk about something else that's kind of like complex, but it's definitely something that needed to be mentioned. And it's the last tab here. It's called size based on. So if you're familiar with the source rectitime method, you know how you can grab the size of any layer, but then there's a time factor, because we are dealing with the timeline. Like, for example, let me explain this real quick. So you would agree with me, we're talking about this text layer, that this text has a different size at the beginning of the layer than it does at 1 second mark, right? So the size changes over time, and that's something you have to calculate in as you create mogurts and things of that nature. And that's why I built this thing. Again, years of experience, years of getting burned on this stuff. I realized, man, that's something you got to pay attention to. So for example, if I go over here and I set it to current time, and if I grab, go over here, let me, by the way, reset everything right now real quick. So we're going to grab current time. And if I take my time indicator right here, and if I pull on this, that's the size of it right here. It's almost to 1920. It's almost to the edge of this. But if I go to this and pull it, let's do pull, you can see it gives me a different size. So where I'm at matters. So again, the time factor. So if you have it set by default, it's time. But if you set it to middle, and if your time indicator is here, and if it's set to middle of the layer, so here's a layer, beginning, end, and the middle, it doesn't matter if your time indicator is right here, which is gonna be a big number. When you go over here and you pull it, it's gonna reference it being right here. So the reason why we do this, like middle, the first, because a lot of times animation happens at the beginning of the layer and the last layer, and you want to grab it finalized. So sometimes you want to just grab it based on where nothing is moving, and that's why the middle is here. Sometimes, if you set it to this beginning of the layer and your time indicator is here, then let's go here. If you pull this, obviously it's going to grab it based on what it is in the beginning, and that comes in very handy a lot of times. So just sometimes, like when you create templates, I always, my biggest thing is like, I always go here. I'm like, okay, if I have any text animation, I want to make sure that I'm at where there's nothing moving. I want to grab that text and make sure everything's adjusted to that. And that's the whole point. It's a bit more complex, but I want you to kind of be familiar with that. So for example, if I select all of these layers and the last layer I select is that one, right? Let me reset the size here real quick. And if I have it set to, let's go here, to the middle, even though I'm right here, if I run this, we're gonna just size it, right? If I run this, you can see it will size it based on where it was in the middle. So sometimes, again, it will come in handy, maybe not to you right now, but as you work on things, you'll hit that bump that I have many times, to where you're like, oh man, things are changing. I want to take that into consideration. And I know I'm talking too much, but as you create templates, you'll know what I'm talking about. So let me kind of show you maybe a practical example. So let's do this. We're gonna go. This is the last composition I have here, and here's what I have here. I have. Oh, by the way, one more thing I need to mention, because I think this is important. Now, if I say this. If I do this, if I have it on code mode, let me reset everything, and I have it set to, let's say, the beginning of the layer. And if I just run this text and say, hey, it says the limit size to the beginning of this layer. And if I run this, notice it will animate this and it works fine. But when I start changing things, you can see I set it to that size, but it's changing it to this size. I mean, as you can see, it's set to 1700, which should be like out here, but the limit is right there. But because not only is it grabbing the size from this width, but it's also basing it on that width as well. So as you can see here, I'm typing it, it will always stay within the border here. So it is correct based on this time. And I know it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that, because it's something that you'll see, it'll twist your brain a bit, but it is working. And sometimes you might feel like it's not working. It's working. It's just doing it based on that time, that moment. And yeah, that's something definitely you need to consider. And by the way, all of these options that I'm talking about, this size based on, it's all also here as well. So we have size based on here. So when you select middle and you run this, and make sure you select the layer, and you run this, you can see it updates it in here for middle, and also custom. So maybe you want to just do it based on this size. When you run this, you can see it says custom time, and it should update the time. I want to make sure it does. Okay, it should put the time in here, but for some reason it's not. I want to make sure it does in the future. All right, so that's all I wanted to talk about as far as these features go. But let's kind of talk about the practical example here. So I'm going to go and we're going to go here. So we have this lower third animated. So watch this. It's animated. Okay, so if I do this, if I select this, it's basically the same thing we just created. I think it was here. Yeah, it's the same thing we created here. But let me show you what it's like creating it here using the time aspect. Because if I just set it to maybe, let's do this. We're gonna go to resize over here. We're gonna let's reset everything. We're gonna create code. So we're gonna make it editable. Or in other words, we're gonna turn it into a template. We're gonna set the limit to 700. I think that's what we did before. And we're gonna maintain the aspect ratio. Now, if I hit this, notice it breaks, it just breaks it, because it just calculates, it's based on time. And as you can see, it changes it. I mean, it messes things up. So that's why it's important, if things are animated, to pick the area that's not animated, which is the middle most of the time, the middle of the layer. And so now if I select the middle and do the same thing, and if I run this, you can see everything works. And now you can, change things. And again, when it hits 700, it will start sizing down. So that's one thing. I'm going to select this and go to Smart Anchor and make sure we have the code. We're going to lock the anchor into that point here so it doesn't change at any time. And then we're going to select also the text here and lock it into the center. We've done this before. But again, do it based on, even Smart Anchor has that, based on animation in the middle of the layer. So the same thing for this, that text animates. So make sure the middle is selected and then do the anchor. Because if you don't, if you do it like time and you lock this in, watch this, it will just mess it up. But if you do it based on middle, lock this in. I know this whole time thing throws people off, and it's kind of hard to get a hold of that and really truly understand it. But it's important because we deal with the timeline, and time is important because size changes throughout the time. It's not always the same. So you have to consider that constantly, especially when you have things moving. And yeah, it will give you a headache. It will. But I am trying to eliminate that for you guys. Okay. So we have that locked in. We have the anchor point. We have that one. So let's do the same thing for stretch. So we're going to go to resizer. We're going to do that 700, no margin. We're going to stretch it. So we're going to stretch it to 700. Let's apply the code. So we're good. And then for that one, I think we did this. We did 700, maintain the aspect ratio, fit to width, 700. We also did like, I think it was 20 or 25. Let's do 25 margin right here, maybe 20. And then that's basically it. and let's run this. Everything was set to the middle of the layer where there's no animation. So let's run this. And so now we have to do some more. Remember, we have to link things up. That's exactly what we're going to do here. So we're going to link, let's do this. We're going to sizer. We're going to link the width for that one, width for this one. And we're going to grab the size of this one. So I already used Smart Animator to animate the text. Okay, so that's good. We're going to bring in Smart Size to get the size of this text. We're going to do it based on the middle. Even this one does too. Not the way it is at the beginning because the size is different. So we're going to do it based on the middle of the layer where there's nothing moving. And boom, just like that, it will give me the correct size. So now I can link that to width. And we're going to also link this to width. And so now, as you can see, when things are still animating, but nothing is breaking. So now I can actually adjust things on the fly and things will move accordingly, and we can make things super long and it will resize. And again, the animation will be the same. There's lots of code involved to create this. And trust me, these tools definitely simplified it for you. If you had to do this by hand, it would take you some time to set it up. So as I work on things, I always try to simplify things and trying to cookie cutter it in a way that next time I work on a project, I don't have to recreate those steps because trust me, they're painful. You don't want to be doing this every single time. So I hope you are able to see how powerful these tools are and how quickly I can create stuff that are complex or require a lot of coding knowledge, and I'm doing it pretty quickly with a few clicks, and it visually makes sense and all that jazz. One more thing I actually wanted to mention that I fixed in this version of Smart Resizer. So before, let's say I take this text and maybe, let me reset everything. Maybe I want to limit it to something like 600 pixels, and let's stretch it. We're going to stretch this. Well, no, let's do maintain aspect ratio. Yeah, we're going to do that. And so now when I run this, right, if I type this, everything's working fine. When it reaches that limit, it's going to start sizing down. But before, if you type something small, like a period, notice right now it's working fine. It's maintaining that size. But before, here's what we had. And that's why I added the scale limit. So before it was set to none, and it didn't even have that. So by default, when you would type something, it would still maintain the same, it would do the same thing, but if you type something small, like a period, see what it does? It's going crazy. I mean, it just broke things. And so what I did to fix it, I introduced this custom limit, and basically you can, it will automatically do that for you. So you don't have to really think about it, but you can set it to whatever limit you want. In this case, it just custom, like if it reaches a certain height, basically a custom limit goes to 100% size. And as you can see, it fixes it and it changes it based on what you're doing it on. If you're running it on, let's do this. Let me delete this real quick. I'm going to just get rid of this. If you run this on the text, let's do something like, well, not this one, hold on. So let's do text. So if you run on a text and if you run this, it automatically sets it to custom limit. But if you run it on a shape or image or something that's not a text, and if you run this, you can see it's set to different. It's set to none because you don't want that to be on anything other than text. And so I did think of a lot of things through, and that's why I added this in. So those of you that have been asking for it, it is in here. I finally made it. It's more technical. A lot of you probably won't even have to face this, but for those of you that are very technical and you need those precise stuff, that's where you go to get this. And that's really it. I know I talked about a lot of stuff, and all of this stuff, I mean, it definitely is heavy and it's kind of hard to simplify something complex, but that's my goal, to simplify things that require a lot of code and make them more user-friendly with tools like Resizer and Anchor, Smart Anchor Size. But I hope you found this useful. Again, I want to thank you guys for purchasing our tools, for supporting us. We wouldn't be able to do what we do here at Ukramedia if it wasn't for awesome people like you. And we thank you for that. You guys mean a lot to us. We appreciate it. And as always, if you're not a part of our smart, or the, I almost said smart community, but it is smart community. If you're not a part of our free community on Facebook, you should definitely consider joining. Just go to ukramedia.com/community. It's totally free to join, and you'll be around some very, very talented, creative people who are so knowledgeable. I mean, we have legends of this industry in that group, so you should definitely join that group. If you have any kind of questions, I know a lot of people ask here on YouTube, and I'm not the quickest to respond because I have, as you can see, I'm always busy coding, doing all kinds of stuff. But we do have people in that community that are available that are like so motivated, love to help you. So if you want to be helped, go to that group. Or if you want to be the mentor and help others, definitely go into that group as well. So we have a variety of different people that have different reasons for being there. But ultimately, it's all based on love, all based on helping each other. So we would love to see you there. Again, ukramedia.com/community. But in the meantime, my name is Sergey Praknevsky, and this is ukramedia.com.